made piteous lamentation to us to save them, which we let them know we would; whereupon they crept all together in a huddle close behind us, as for protection. I left my men drawn up together, and charging them to hurt nobody, but if possible to get at some of our people, and see what devil it was possessed them, and what they intended to do, and to command them off, assuring them that if they stayed till daylight they would have 100,000 men about their ears, I left them, and went among those flying people, taking only 2 of our men with me; and there was, indeed, a piteous spectacle among them. Some of them had their feet terribly burned with trampling and running through the fire, others their hands burned; one of the women had fallen down in the fire, and was very much burned before she could get out again; and 2 or 3 of the men had cuts in their backs and thighs from our men pursuing, and another was shot through the body, and died while I was there. I would fain have learned what the occasion of all this was, but I could not understand one word they said; though, by signs, I perceived some of them knew not what was the occasion themselves. I was so terrified in my thoughts at this outrageous attempt that I could not stay there, but went back to my own men, and resolved to go into the middle of the town, through the fire, or whatever might be in the way, and put an end to it, cost what it would. Accordingly, as I came back to my men, I told them my resolution, and commanded them to follow me, when, at the very moment, came 4 of our men, with the boatswain at their head, roving over heaps of bodies they had killed, all covered with blood and dust, as if they wanted more people to massacre, when our men hallooed to them as loud as they could halloo; and with much ado one of them made to hear, so that they knew who we were, and came up to us. As soon as the boatswain saw us, he set up a halloo like a shout of triumph; for having, as he thought, more help come, and without waiting to hear me, "Captain," says he, "noble captain, I am glad you are come; we have not half done yet. Villainous hellhound dogs! I'll kill as many of them as poor Tom has hairs upon his head. We have sworn to spare none of them; we'll root out the very nation of them from the earth." And thus he ran on, out of breath, too, with action, and would not give us leave to speak a word. At last, raising my voice that I might silence him a little, "Barbarous dog," said I, "what are you doing? I won't have one creature touched more upon pain of death. I charge you upon your life to stop your hands and stand still here, or you are a dead man this minute." "Why, sir," says he, "do you know what you do, or what they have done? If you want a reason for what we have done, come hither." And with that he showed me the poor fellow hanging, with his throat cut. I confess I was urged then myself, and at another time would have been forward enough; but I thought they had carried their rage too far, and remembered Jacob's words to his sons Simeon and Levi, "Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce; and their wrath, for it was cruel." But I had now a new task upon my hands; for when the men I had carried with me saw the sight, as I had done, I had as much to do to restrain them as I should have had with the others; nay, my nephew himself fell in with them, and told me, in their hearing, that he was only concerned for fear of the men being overpowered; and as to the people, he thought not one of them ought to live, for they had all glutted themselves with the murder of the poor man, and that they ought to be used like murderers. Upon these words away ran 8 of my men, with the boatswain and his crew, to complete their bloody work; and I, seeing it quite out of my power to restrain them, came away pensive and sad, for I could not bear the sight, much less the horrible noise and cries of the poor wretches that fell into their hands. I got nobody to come back with me but the supercargo and 2 men, and with these walked back to the boat. It was a very great piece of folly in me, I confess, to venture back, as it were, alone; for as it began now to be almost day, and the alarm had run over the country, there stood about 40 men armed with lances and bows at the little place where the 12 or 13 houses stood, mentioned before; but by accident I missed the place, and came directly to the seaside, and by the time I got to the seaside it was broad day. Immediately I took the pinnace and went on board, and set her back to assist the men in what might happen. I observed, about the time that I got to the boat side, that the fire was pretty well out, and the noise abated; but in about half an hour after I got on board, I heard a volley of our men's firearms, and saw a great smoke. This, as I understood afterwards, was our men falling upon the men who, as I said, stood at the few houses on the way, of whom they killed 16 or 17, and set all the houses on fire, but did not meddle with the women or children. By the time the men got to the shore again with the pinnace our men began to appear. They came dropping in, not in two bodies as they went, but straggling here and there in such a manner, that a small force of resolute men might have cut them all off. But the dread of them was upon the whole country, and the men were surprised, and so frightened, that I believe 100 of them would have fled at the sight of but 5 of our men. Nor in all this terrible action was there a man that made any considerable defence. They were so surprised between the terror of the fire and the sudden attack of our men in the dark, that they knew not which way to turn themselves; for if they fled one way they were met by one party, if back again by another, so that they were everywhere knocked down; nor did any of our men receive the least hurt, except one that sprained his foot, and another that had one of his hands burned. Chapter 10.